my girl and I go out and join the park parade. Arm in arm we stroll along.
Welcome to another episode called Collecting War. Today I am here with my friend Giancarlo, or Gianni Azzopardi. I have known you for 5 years now, I think, unfortunately. So a bit of background for Giancarlo. He's a history student. He's very passionate about history. He works with Heritage Malta at the National War Museum. And of course, we've been talking right now that he's not an ordinary collector in the sort of the most understandable term, that people who collect things on a regular basis with a certain team. He sort of jumps from team to team, but in a very thought out way, I would say. And obviously sometimes he gives up on collecting like we all do, and sometimes joins back. But I will leave it to him to better describe himself, if he even is a collector. So my first question would be, are you a collector?
I would consider myself as an avid collector. So with prices being what they are and things getting rarer and rarer, and my salary not exactly being able to pay for all that material, what I do is I just wait, and whenever something crops up and that's for a good price, I grab it. So for example, the last thing I bought, which I'm very proud of actually, is my Royal Army chaplain's uniform. And it was a spur of the moment purchase. I got it for a very good price, and I doubt I'll see something like that again for the time being. Apart from that, I'm mostly into collecting books. I'm always reading something different. Is that okay?
Something that Giancarlo and I both share is obviously our age. We are part of the younger generation, and I think it's very hard to explain to someone who's 22 or 23 that he just bought a priest uniform from 8 years ago. So imagine I am someone who just met for the first time. How do you explain to me why you spend how much money on a uniform of a priest, a chaplain? So a chaplain what is a chaplain, and why are you interested in owning his uniform?
So I think this fascination with the clergy, I think it started out partially because of you, Nikolai. Back in the Word Artna days, everyone would have their own superhero. I think ours was the former Archbishop of Malta. Yes. The best. And there's something fascinating. So the position which priests held among society, and I also had an interest in collecting militaria. So priest uniform and militaria is the next best thing. And besides that, it's a niche team, so you don't see a lot of people collecting military clergy material. There's a bit of history about it in Malta, which I'm still looking into, and it's worth going into. Usually what people collect is either something that has to do with a regiment, or the paratroopers, or the SAS, especially commandos, which are a major hit at the moment. So whilst everyone's buying commando things, possibly mostly fake, I'm satisfied with my priest uniform. Let's call it that.
A lot of collectors I spoke with obviously identified, as you're saying, a niche, sort of a specialty which they focus on. They could even have multiple specialties, right? You could focus on commandos or say Germans, but every single thing about Germany, you know. So is it important to you as a collector to have a specialty, or what is your comment to collectors who collect everything?
So at the end of the day, it's up to the person. Like everything else, you have a phase. So when you start collecting, you buy everything. So when I first started collecting, I got everything from spent cartridges to bits and pieces of uniforms, East German underwear, anything you can get your hands on.
Did you wear it?
No. But as you grow older and become a bit wiser, you start saying, this is rubbish. And you start reading into things, and the amount of things you buy gets smaller and smaller and more specialized. So, for example, people have an entire collection dedicated to Maltese uniforms, an entire collection on anti-aircraft shells. And to get to something that niche, it takes time. So, like I said, at the moment, in my case, I'm just buying Royal Army Chaplaincy, Militaria. But again, it's a phase. So you could be collecting German paratrooper uniforms at one point, then some time passes, and you move on to something else. It's an experience.
This thing about a phase is, I think, something that other collectors haven't admitted to. So what I'm interested in to ask you is, you seem to be developing an idea that a collection reflects the collector, his interests, right? So, but you are comfortable with the idea that the collector's interests might change. So people change, their collections change, right? But maybe is it because you think we're young and we're still trying to find sort of a solid interest, or because older collectors have never told me this is the first time in the podcast that someone has said a collection goes through different phases of interest. Older collectors are like, I've been collecting this for 20 years, or recently I've discovered this part of my collection, but it's still along the same theme. So how much of the collection reflects the collector, and does it reflect if the collector changes?
So I think it does reflect the collector per se. Like you said, there are some people who have been collecting for 30 years. It's really hard to keep on the same topic for 30 years. In fact, most of these people would have a very vast collection, and very rarely they're on the same theme. So if they collect German militaria, fair enough, and they stick to German militaria, but they'd have uniforms, webbing, armaments, documents, books, helmets. It's all different. So they go through a helmet phase. They go through a uniform phase. They go through a paratrooper underwear phase.
Why?
It just piques your interest, and then you go on it because you say, I want to collect it all. So if there were 5 different types of paratrooper helmets that were issued, you try and get them all. Yes, it takes you years, especially today, but you set your mind to it, and you try and get as many helmets as you can. And there's also the person's beliefs. So,
what do you mean by beliefs?
So there tend to be some maybe very rare instances, but maybe those who are more inclined to the British period, so reminiscing about that period, they're more inclined to collect British memorabilia. Those maybe, who at some point maybe had like us, we had a communist, socialist phase when we were teenagers, so we collect East German militaria, mostly because it's widely available, but it was a phase. We're 17. So yeah, it reflects on you as well. I mean, it's an extension of you, it's your work, so you have to enjoy it.
This idea of it's an extension of you. A lot of collectors, even if you see where they put their collection, it's in their home or even in their bedroom. It's something literally personal, and they can't live without it. It defines them. It's who they are. I've met collectors who told me, I am happiest when I'm surrounded by my collection. Is this something you agree or you share?
Yes, to a great extent. It's your achievement. So we're just starting out. I have maybe a few uniforms, and I'm very satisfied with them because I looked for them, I researched them, I found them, and to have them, it's like a museum piece in your own home. It's a part of history, it's someone's story. So yes, I agree with that. It is something you should be proud of. Maybe have it in my bedroom, not so much.
Why not?
Good question. It gets in the way. This is the thing. I've seen collections where their actual collections enroach the space in the house. And this is another thing. You need to have a dedicated space. The second it's in your kitchen or your bathroom or next to your bedside table, let's take a chill pill and find some space elsewhere. And besides that, it's also a safety concern. My collection is small, but for those who have a big collection, I wouldn't feel comfortable having it. You know, in case of a burglary or something like that, I wouldn't be comfortable having it running around on a mannequin.
So far, Giancarlo, you've spoken about this idea, your problem with having a collection close to you in terms of practicality, because of burglary, because of fire, or because of safety. Mm-hmm. But is there something also respecting the items? No, if you have an officer's uniform that got shot in the Somme, and you're keeping it next to your bedside table.
That's a bit weird.
Why? Why is it weird? Because some people don't find it weird. Some people tell me because I get close to the object like that. But for you, it's weird.
So for me, that's not my thing. It's just not my thing. It's personal opinion, of course. But again, it changes to whoever you talk to. One person might be comfortable with it because they want to be next to it.
But why are you uncomfortable with it?
I think for me it's too much.
But what do you like too much?
I'd like it. So you have like a study, you want to keep it in that study. I wouldn't want to, because if I look at it, I keep on looking at it. And what happens is I want to get some more.
I see.
So I'd rather keep it within a dedicated spot where I can go, I can look at it when I feel like it, I can appreciate it, I can research. And maybe there are also those collectors, the more experienced ones, who would be married. Their wives would not appreciate it. So I've seen this, you know who you are, you have your wives. They have complained.
Noted. This idea, because you mentioned that personally you like to have a separate space for a collection, because otherwise, do you think this reflects the idea that for people who identify as collectors, they aren't, they don't have a problem with sharing their space with their collection because their collection is them. But for you, because your collection is not really you are a collector sometimes, sort of, you are okay with having a separate space because really Giancarlo is not an entirely sort of, Giancarlo is not a collector is not Giancarlo. Giancarlo collects. So for you, having a collection in a separate space makes sense. But for others, because they identify with it, they want it as close as possible. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, I think I agree with that. Speaking on that topic, I mostly collect books, whatever they are, and those are my bedroom. I want to keep them there where I can see them. So I can understand the need to have your collection close to you. So nothing against that, of course.
That's good. I also like to collect books, and I mostly collect books. Not mostly, but one of the things I like to collect, especially militensia, things you don't find in libraries.
It's a
cheaper option. But I also collect militaria, but mainly I focus on shells, which is very, very boring compared to what I actually read and research around. But some people collect uniforms and they like to connect them with people. But the thing that always fascinates me, because you are one of, every collector has their own unique thing that I relate to. Apart from age, what I relate to you as well is the fact that we sort of sometimes question why we are interested in the military per se. I don't know if you agree with that. So lately I've been really thinking about, and maybe you can comment on that, why do we even, I mean, there is obviously a fascination with war. You have done a thesis about war, World War I, can I say it? You have researched medical history in Malta in World War I, so during the Gallipoli campaigns and stuff like that, and now you're doing another thesis, it's we focus on war again, if I'm not mistaken. So we are both fascinated with war, but at the same time we want to keep a distance from it, I would feel. So why do you think we're interested in war?
So there's always been a fascination. So as kids, we look at war as an adventure. Let's say that. I grew up going to Scouts, which takes you to the adventure part of the military. We grew up playing Call of Duty, Battlefield, and all that sort of thing. So from our generation's point of view, it sounds dark, but we saw it as intriguing and adventurous at the same time. Basically the same, we would have fallen in the same trap as the First World War generation. They went off to an adventure. But besides that, it's also the story behind it, and also the fact that militaria is cool to look at.
Yes.
Like there's something about holding an MG42 which takes a boost on your ego, I think. Now, that's an extreme way of putting it, but
I don't think so. I don't think it's extreme.
Anyway, but there's also the smaller things. So I started out collecting things I would find either on the ground, walking in the countryside, what's left of it, or snorkeling with my father. Now, my father is from a previous generation which remembers the British very well here. So obviously he had that intrigue to look for military because he grew up surrounded by it, so especially as a Navy sailor's son. And obviously that interest he grew up with, that went on to me as well. So it's also passed on, but there's also the element, like you said, there's a fascination with war.
Okay, so now this I didn't know about you, that you have family members who are actually in the service, in the Royal Navy, or yes. So when you see militaria, do you see A, your family, your ancestry, 2, do you see history, or 3, do you see something that is cool, what you just mentioned? It's something that you shouldn't really have, but you have, and it gives you sort of a thrill, like something you shouldn't possess, or do you see everything I just mentioned in the objects?
The latter, you see everything. It's a combination. So even so, the last thing you said, there's kids being fascinated, which I got in. Kids being fascinated with things that have to do with history, even war. In events, when we fire blanks, when reenactors fire blanks, you see kids, boys and girls, picking up cartridges because it's cool. Look at me in the eye and tell me that a cartridge isn't cool. You're 6, it's cool. It's something you play with at home. As a boy, I had like a toy soldier set, Action Men, and then later Call of Duty and that sort of thing. So there's that. But being Maltese, obviously, yes, if you're Maltese, you're likely to have had someone in the services. Just like you're likely to have someone who lives in Australia in the family. So yes, there's that interest as well because, for example, I said my grandfather was in the Navy. You have an interest in what he did because it's interesting. My grandfather was a poor boy from Rabat, a family of 10, and that poor boy from Rabat ended up going to places like Holland, living in the UK, Asia, he went to Singapore, Hong Kong, It's an adventure, so you want to know where he went, what he did. He was just a simple cook, but it's still fascinating. Even seeing his items, his recipe books, it's fascinating because you feel attached to them. Not just because he's a relative, but even because he's a fellow like Maltese like myself, having done all of this by the time he was my age. And there's a historical relevance to it, so it's a piece of him. So you want to experience it.
There's a lot to unpack here. I would like to just put a note that I think one of the things that we have in common, and I haven't mentioned, and it's an important thing, is we're both reenactors as well. I remembered when you mentioned the shells after reenactment. So Giancarlo and I, we both form part of reenactment groups. We both reenact British infantry during the Second World War and other things. But no, I don't reenact, please. That's your fetish. That's not mine. I have other fetishes. But what you said really opened my eyes, because yes, when we fire at reenactment, we fire blanks, and when the blanks hit the ground and they scatter children, they go crazy.
In fact, these days you have to be careful, because if a blank misfires, you really have to be careful. Someone can get hurt, you end up in court, insurance, mbaċċa Facebook posts, hassle, patroni, jajat.
All right. But this always fascinated me, that children, even young, 4, 5, 6, 7 years, 8, so very young, even toddlers, when they see a cartridge, first of all, it's shiny.
Yes.
Shiny brass piece. But also because it's a bullet, so it's something that kills. So I think you just hit on two things. One, when you mentioned this about bullets, that there's a fascination that you hold something that could potentially kill someone or yourself. So there's a fascination with death. That's the first part. And the second thing is when you started saying about your grandfather who traveled the world and he was your age. So there's a sort of projection on your end that he was your age and he traveled the world. So I think you just mentioned two very important points about why we are so fascinated with war. One, death, and second is adventure. So are these things you share? You share? Are these what motivates you to collect war, death, and adventure?
Adventure mostly, because, like I said, the military, especially in the past, was one of the most common ways to see the world. Not in a nice way. It was sold as a big adventure, and you did see the world. So being an 18-year-old and being told that you can go out on a massive adventure, serve your country, take something to be proud of, was something which attracted a lot of young men to join the services. And I think that's what pulls our generation today to collect militaria, to read the stories of what people did, do something that you can maybe emulate it, so not go to war. No one likes that, but go on a big adventure. So, for example, what I like to do is what many reenactors do abroad is they get a specific mission, especially commando missions these days, where they went out, they were dropped in the middle of nowhere in Norway, Germany, Italy, and they follow the path that those saboteurs, those commandos would have taken to reach their objective, because usually it's either on the top of a mountain or among the hills, you know. Recently I went to Scotland to go visit the commando training grounds. There's quite a lot of kilometers involved, and even for yourself to go see these it's something that you learn. It's something new you learn, where they were, what they did, the training involved, the missions that they did, and also you yourself looking for these. It's an adventure because they are not easy to find.
So here we're speaking about collecting is a gateway drug to reenacting. Sort of, what I mean is that you start with collecting things to get connected to the past, and then of course we as reenactors like to get as close to it as possible. So then you collect the uniform, and then you actually go to the place. So if you're collecting commando, you get maybe a piece of fabric, and then maybe a bullet, and maybe a firearm, and then you get the uniform, and then the next step is to actually go there in the training grounds, follow literally, not figuratively, literally in their steps. And that's something that a lot of people don't really understand, and maybe sometimes I even question why I like it so much. Do you think it's because our lives are boring?
There are people who collect snow globes. My grandmother collects mugs. There's a very vast mug collection, 50 years worth. But that's a mug collection. I have military uniforms. I think mine is somewhat more. It's more interesting to me. To me. No, I don't think it's because we've got nothing better to do. Maybe not. Maybe we don't have something better to spend it on. But I think it's an interesting hobby to have these days. However, I think it's a bit tricky because with things getting rarer and rarer and demand for antique militaria increasing, it's becoming very difficult to collect without having to sell a kidney.
I've sold mine.
You've sold your kidney? I've not done that yet. Uh-huh.
Let me ask you a question with something off topic. But did you ever consider joining the army when you were younger?
I think it was something on my mind when I was maybe like 12, but it wasn't really something I seriously considered.
Not seriously?
Not seriously, no. I mean, it's just a personal choice. I was always more of a office kind of guy, and then going out. So in my case, I'm an assistant curator. I'm in the office, then I go on a site, I see something new, I enjoy it. That was something that was always for me, and I always considered it. Joining the army, getting yelled at, and more importantly, getting up at God knows what time, at 5 o'clock, is not something I'd enjoy. But I did do other things, so the Scout movement, St. John's Ambulance Corps, these are things which, if you're looking for an adventure, you can join these movements. You learn something new every day, and you're also contributing to society. And you don't have to possibly kill someone if needs be.
So am I understanding correctly, Giancarlo, that, for example, you're saying that reenactment and the and scouts and things like that allow you to enjoy aspects of the military without actually joining it, right? And doing benefit.
So, for example, I mentioned the scouts. The scout movement was, when it was started, it was a way to unite the children of the British Empire. So there's that aspect. But it was also a way where you could give young boys the life of the military, the life of adventure, without having to send them to the Sudan or Tanzania or Zululand or South Africa to kill the boys. So it's just a safe way of looking for adventure.
But they were going to be used for war eventually, so it was training yet still, no?
Maybe way back in the day, because especially back then, Scouts was tougher than it is today. But today, I wouldn't really consider it. So today, I'm a Scout leader myself. I'm more focused on problem solving, tying your knots properly, getting the jobs done properly, learning how to use power tools. I'd rather focus on that than have them march and drill it into their head to serve their country in the battlefield. I'd rather tell them to take care of their country by not littering or respecting the environment and respecting the people around them. So that's what I teach them. Before, maybe not. Before, there was an element of serving your country and empire.
If one of your cubs or scouts comes up to you and tells you, listen, Giancarlo, I am going to start a collection of militaria, what would you tell him?
Don't. No. First, I'd ask, did you find something? Because that's how it usually starts out.
Especially Ain Tuffiha there.
Ain Tuffiha, Pembroke, there's the range.
They find a bullet or something.
They find a bullet, and it's not exactly fired, so you have to take it, you have to explain why. They cry, you leave them cry, so they grow up. It's that fascination which pulls them. So if they want to start a small collection, by all means. Let's say I was 10 when I started really picking things from the floor and from the sea. No, I'd say go ahead. As they maybe get older, I tell them, listen, be careful. I'm noticing you're buying a lot of things on eBay. Don't be shy to go to someone who's experienced. Tell them, listen, I'm interested in buying this medal or this uniform. What's your take on it? Is the price okay for the time being? Is it real? And they give you their opinion. It's very good to have the experience of someone who knows what they're doing. It's something I do myself. So that's one thing I'd say to someone who wants to start collecting. Consult with someone who knows what they're looking at. You don't want to spend €200 on something you think is real, but it's not. And I'd also say watch how much you actually spend. So when I started buying from eBay, I had a campaign medal phase where I'd buy campaign medals from the Second World War. And I caught myself having spent a decent portion of my stipend. And I said, whoa, this is not good. So I taught myself how to budget myself. And that's something I'd tell someone who's starting out. Watch the bank.
Thinking about it, I don't think I ever consciously decided I want to start collecting. It's something that sort of just happened. Mm-hmm. Is this something you agree with?
Yes, it's something that starts happening. So in my case, it's something that I was as such raised into it. My dad used to go diving. He'd pick things off the seabeds way back before it was illegal, mind you. Don't pick things anymore. Don't touch anything. I was raised into it. My dad did it, and I took it to another level. My dad never bought antique militaria. I did. I took it an extra level. So maybe for my father it was a very minute side hobby. For me, I took it a bit serious. Took it seriously. Not as much as other people, because there are very vast collections in Malta, which is something, if you know a collector who's been collecting for 30 years and they show you their collection, it is a privilege, because they're actually trusting you to come into their house and see their most valuable possessions.
That's true, and that's something I always say, that people's collections are they reflect who they are. It's like they're showing you a deep part of themselves. And the thing is that Some people obviously don't collect what you collect or what I collect. They collect, for example, firearms. And that's not really problematic in the sense of law or ethical. It's not, firearms are a justified historical artifact. They hold a lot of semiotic value, cultural value, and they are worthwhile safeguarding for sure. But some people might say, okay, you collect books and chaplains' uniforms and medals, and those are the residues of war that we can live with because you can put them in a museum. But some people might collect firearms from conflicts, and those are things that actually killed people or might have killed people. So what is your comment on people who collect the darker relics of war, sort of bombs, shrapnel, firearms? Because you don't never mention that you collected those.
I don't really have a problem with that myself. I don't think anyone should. I don't think anyone should use them against someone else. So let's put that disclaimer.
Unless necessary.
Don't kill anyone. Okay. It's part of history again. So, for example, I know someone who collects artillery shells from World War II, specifically World War II. And I think he has every type of shell that was used in Malta during the Second World War, which is a very impressive piece of collection, especially when you see the size of some of them. There are people who collect weapons. Again, besides having the personal interest, because it intrigues you, it's death, like we mentioned, it's also something that's a part of history. I don't collect them because they're not within my budget, and because they're not exactly my kind of thing, not because I have anything against them, far from it, it's just...
Why wouldn't you collect a firearm?
I think the biggest reason, one thing is the hassle that comes with purchasing a firearm these days. There's a lot of red tape and bureaucracy, I think. And also, I don't have the space for firearms. I would like to collect every firearm that was used by the British Army from 1800 to 1979, the Maltese period, the Maltese colonial period, but I don't have anywhere to put them. And that's also something about me. If I can't finish the collection, if I know that there were an X amount of weapons used, an X amount of uniforms used, I need to have them all. Having them unfinished, it's like it's something like I started something and I didn't finish it, and that annoys me. But firearms are just not my kind of thing. I don't collect shells either. There's a lot of things to collect, and if you go on buying something from that theme, you buy a shell, you want to collect all the shells, you want a weapon, you want to collect all the guns, you buy a uniform, you want to collect all the uniform, you end up having a hodgepodge of things and a bit of a mess. I've seen collections like that. They're very interesting, but it's a lot to go through. Once I saw a pocket watch collection from someone who collected German militaria. So he went from German militaria, he bought a pocket watch, and he wants to collect pocket watches. It's cool, but a lot of work.
This idea of completeness seems very important to you, and it's not to most collectors. You said that if I start a new collection, it has to be something I can finish. So what is it about having a complete set? And can it ever be possible? Because how can you say this is a complete set? How do you define a complete collection? And two, what do you think it's all about? Is it about having part of history for yourself, a complete part of history? Is it about controlling, sort of, because you have all the sets?
I think the term is OCD. OCD, I don't know. Obsessive compulsive disorder. I need to have things finished and neat and tidy. I think to a certain extent it's very, very, very difficult. I myself have started collections and they're not finished. Things get rarer and there are things in your collection which are very difficult to find. So, for example, in my case, I think I have one collection which I consider it complete, and that is the cap tallies used in Malta for Fort St. Angelo, Fort Manuel, Halfar, and then HMS Surprise, which was the ship used for the Commander-in-Chief. A lot of Maltese were on that. So cap tallies, that's the only collection I have which I consider, in my opinion, complete. In fact, they're framed and no one can touch them. Apart from that, I also have 1907 bayonets. They're all the same bayonets, but different makers. It's not finished, but I'd like to think that I have a lifetime to get them. All the 1907 bayonets made by the different manufacturers. It's a long road ahead. I'm not in a rush.
So maybe just to sort of wrap up. So you mentioned that it's in a frame and nobody can touch them.
Yeah.
So you seemed very OCD, sort of. First of all, you said it has to be complete. It has to be framed. And nobody can touch them. So for you, it seems very important that things are in their place and they stay there, sort of. They're there. And is this because you're afraid of them becoming disorganized and losing their value that way, or is it because you think they are worthwhile having them in a certain? Is it you think they are so important, especially to the people who hoard or use those things, that it's important for you to validate them, to have them organized?
I think it's very important to have them organized. One, so you know where your things are. The last thing you want is to have something that costs a lot of money, to have something with a lot of sentimental value. Something you spent ages looking for, and you don't know where it is, or it's in bits and pieces. I think every collector should have his collection organized, and I think every major collection I've seen, it is very organized. I've seen people who collect old books. They have them packed in special cases, documents in special folders, uniforms covered up. They're not on display, they are covered up. It's something you want to take care of. It's your baby, it's your collection. You understand? And apart from that, I'd also want to keep a specific collection together, because that, one, increases its value. Second, it also increases the education side. So you have, like I said, I have these cap tallies, they're framed, and I can instantly, when someone sees them, I can easily explain what they are. It's something nice to look at. It's a museum piece, if you want to call it that. Something maybe people could discuss also is it worth having these things hidden behind closed doors in someone's house and not just give them to a museum? As someone who works in a museum, I've been working in the museum industry for quite some time now.
20 years.
Not that long. Like 5 years, I think.
But it feels like 35.
It feels like 65 years. I do think that it's very important to have public access to things like these. So I don't know how to answer that question, whether a collection should be public, because obviously if you bought them, it's yours. But as someone who I work to educate the public on Maltese history. To see a document closed in a drawer somewhere, it's especially knowing full well that at some point it may get damaged after the collector passes away, for example. It hurts. But Oh well, take care of your collections.
And this is something that is more prevalent in our lives because we can actually go into detail and appreciate things that, so for example, you find something and someone says it's garbage, but for us we can identify it and say this is something very important for this particular conflict. And I also have been to many private collections and I say, how the hell are we going to make this public, sort of? And that's something I've been trying to do as well by interviewing collectors and opening up the discussion about these things. So it's very interesting that you mentioned it out of your own sort of will. My question is, do you think that, for example, you said you collected bayonets, and this is something I touched upon already in this interview, but there is a certain element, I feel, of trivialization, like we were mentioning at the beginning of the interview, of you have a uniform used in the Somme in the First World War, and it's next to your bedside. Or, for example, capitalis, these were worn on sailors, and now they're in a frame, like a National History Museum exhibit, like butterflies sort of next to each other. So it's very important to keep things in a place and categorized. But do you think that what justifies someone, a private person, keeping these things, and should it happen?
That's a really difficult question to answer. I think people should be allowed to have collections. Yes. I mean,
there's a lot of things to collect.
There is a lot of things to collect.
You can't have a museum and...
I mean, first of all, there are many duplicates of something. So if you buy a uniform, a museum probably has 10 of those uniforms. In fact, a problem which I learned, for example, at the Imperial War Museum is that they have a large collection of Irving jackets. I have a large collection of Irving jackets. These are the bomber jackets used by a flight crew. You don't find these often in the public for sale, for example, for collections, but museums have these because they are a national collection. They were government property used by the military, and now they're in a safe space in the museum. So to limit everything in a museum, I don't think it's fair. Then again, if it's a book handwritten by, I don't know, someone, if it's a letter written by Jesus, I think it should be in a museum.
I think it will be fake at that point.
It would probably fake, but let's say if it's a real, legit letter written by Jesus, it shouldn't be in a museum. It shouldn't be in a private collection, hidden away from the public. It should be in a museum, kept safe for generations to come. You know? So if anyone has a Jesus letter,
a real one.
My last two questions, and they're very difficult questions to answer, so I think you need to take a sort of... So where do we draw the line? Because you mentioned an Irving jacket is okay, it's not something extremely rare, but at the same time it's not very common. So where do we draw the line? How does a museum define what is worth keeping at the national collection? One. And two, and maybe I'll get back to this question because you might forget it, is that to what extent are we actually preserving things by putting them in the museum? Because obviously a collector, there's someone appreciating it 24/7, especially if it's under his bed. But of course there's this issue of conservation, but let's put it aside. But sometimes I feel that museums, they hoard things, and they put them in deep storage and they enter the collective unconscious. Sort of it's there, and if you need it, it's there, but I don't know where it is. It's sort of, it always becomes like a rubbish heap.
I forgot what were the questions? Where do we draw the line on what belongs in a museum and what can be kept in a private collection? So, like I said, it depends on the historical relevance of the object. If it's something very rare, if it's something of sentimental value to the nation, and it's in your collection, I urge you to maybe consider lending it to a museum for a short while, so that people can see what it is, even if they learn something new. And it's something to consider. Now, obviously, collectors take care of their items. They belong to them. A museum's items belongs to the museum. You have a lot of employees in a museum, and you have a lot of items. So there may not be that attachment, like it's your baby, so much so that you keep it under your bed or sleep with it. But from that end, I think there may be more professionalism on how to take care of things in a museum. One, you'd have qualified conservators. So if something gets broken, if something gets moldy, if something needs restoration, we have the people, we have the resources to take care of them. A collector may not have the resources to take care of the item properly. Many serious collectors, in fact, consult conservationists who know what they're doing, who have the resources to, if you have a moldy document, they hand it over to a conservationist and they will take care of it. But then there are also the DIY collectors, specifically people who, let's say they buy a uniform and it's dirty. They put it in a washing machine and it comes out shrunk, thinking they're gonna make it better, but in the end they made it worse. In the museum there's also a policy. Should you restore it, or should we leave it as it is because the damage it has, the stains on it, they're part of the collection now. It's part of the object's history. A collector might not see it that way. A collector might see a dirty uniform, he wants to wear it for reenacting, and he wants to clean it. We'd be a bit careful. Or a conservationist, because I have my foot in both camps and I have to be careful what I say. I think I answer your questions.
Not to sort of put any shade, because of course there are collectors that take a lot of care and they invest a lot, arguably more time and energy and resources into their objects than museums. Some collectors that actually have the resources to do so. So let's not. There are obviously collectors that do much more damage to their collection, but there are some collectors that basically they invest their whole life into their collection, and they have a relationship with museums, and they contribute to museums as much as museums contribute to collections, so as towards the public.
Yes. So, like you said, Nikolai, serious collectors really do invest in taking care of their items. They consult professionals on how to best take care of them. They know what's in their collection. In a museum, you might not have that because, again, there's a catalogue of items, but there could be tens of thousands of items. It's a national collection. There is a lot of things. And if something gets moldy or if something has a termite infestation, and you might not notice immediately, a collector would. One, because it's in his house. If something gets moldy, he's going to smell it. If there's a termite infestation, he's going to realize. So there's more of a personal attachment from the collector's side. Not that a museum doesn't take care of its things, but it's easier to have a smaller collection and know where everything is and in what state it is than having to keep up with thousands and thousands and thousands of artifacts, which, I mean, in Malta, the agencies, museum agencies do take care of their items. I work with Heritage Malta, we have our own labs, they do a very good job at taking care of the massive collection of Maltese treasures. There's Fondazione Wirtartna, which is an NGO, Din L'Art Helwa, they're all good. They're all good agencies, they take care of their people, their collections, and it's always a pleasure to work with them.
I think my last question is the saddest one. So what is going to happen to Giancarlo's collection after Giancarlo? What are your plans for it? And would you consider donating it to a museum?
I'd burn everything. If I can have it. No. I think in the future I'd consider donating it or selling it.
You wouldn't have a problem selling it.
I think, to be honest, it's easier to donate because selling it you have to go on eBay. eBay is a hassle.
Everything is about practicality to you. The hassle, how much space, how much the paperwork.
No, I'd consider donating because you get invested into an industry, you see what it does, you see what it tries to accomplish, and in the back of your mind is, how can I contribute to this? I have a collection at home. I'd like to keep it for the time being because at the same time, with other collectors, it's a flex. I have a priest's uniform.
Let's explain what a flex is to the older generation or the audience.
Like when you flex your muscles.
You boast.
You're like an ego booster yourself among collectors. There are, I can't compete with the more experienced collectors. However, even with the most experienced collectors, something I notice is, even with the smallest thing you find, or at least they look impressed with it, with what you did. So, again, keeping on the theme of the chaplain's uniform, quite a sad detail. Experienced collectors have asked me about it, the history behind it, who's it named to, and in fact, I've been asked so much about this uniform that I have to research who it belonged to, more about the chaplains in Malta, so that I can justify me having it, so to speak. But,
So Giancarlo's collection will probably be sold in about 50 years or 60 years time?
Or donated.
Or
donated. I don't know. I mean, I'm 24. No, 24. I think it's a bit early to tell, but maybe those older generations, I have seen people who have valued their items just in case they die. So they'd value their items and leave everything to their next of kin. They have a whole catalogue of what's in the collection, the value, so that if they want to sell them, they can sell them at the right price. Or if they want to keep it, they know what they have, So, yeah.
I think we've touched on a lot of points, and I think this will make a great podcast. But very, very last thing is, now I want you to recommend someone for the next podcast. Who comes up in your mind that could contribute to this discussion on collecting and war?
I think quite a lot of people. So to start out with people our age, I think there's everyone from Battlefront, like losers such as myself who collect junk no one wants. That's what many people tell me. So apart people from Battlefront, and there's people from people who collect political memorabilia as well, that are our age. That's another interesting topic, why we collect politicians. I think you have something as well.
But I think for the sake of this podcast, I want to keep it on war.
Let's keep it on. That's not. I digress. Sorry. So, apart from your friends, I also have some people from my reenactment group, Malta Command. There is Kurt de Gabriele, who's a little older than me. I think he's 31-ish. He looks into the medical side. He's a pharmacist, a very good pharmacist, despite not giving you certain drugs. He's a very good pharmacist. No, he collects military and medical memorabilia. There is also some maybe more experienced people, like Colin McAuliffe, who's very experienced. He will take care of you and your collection and consult. And there's also a legend amongst many people, Dennis Darmanin, who knows, I think, everything. Everything. another legend.
So those are your 3 main recommendations.
I think so. I mean, I hope they don't mind.
I hope so too. I hope so too.
I hope so too. Not to just kidnap them and ask them.
The point of the podcast is, I think maybe you can tell me if it's true that these discussions, everyone has them on their own or with someone else, but nobody. We have a lot of collectors in Malta, but not a lot of discussions about collecting. So it's sort of something everyone does it on their own, and nobody actually consults. Or I mean, they do, but very rarely. I don't know if that's something you agree with.
Yes. So one thing collectors discuss is where I found it, how much I paid for it, how I'm taking care of it, how rare this is. We never discuss why did I just buy this. The justification for 3,000 euro. The justification is because it's a rare piece of history. So what?
Which history?
Which history? Whose history? No, that's another aspect. We never ask ourselves why we do it. We say it to ourselves in a joking manner. Tipo, why the hell did I just spend this money on this uniform? And we joke about it, saying it's a passion. It is a passion, but we never really go into it, why we got into it in the first place. So, interesting podcast, process, interesting initiative. I hope I don't make anyone angry for my statements.
I think we're way past that, Giancarlo. I think you've made half the local population angry from even outside of collecting. So I wish you luck on evading future libel cases and legal disputes.
I know what to do with libel cases. There is a very good video on YouTube on what to do with a libel case.
And on that note, I think we're going to wrap up this podcast. Thank you very much, Giancarlo, for your time. And we will see you at the next podcast. Thank you very much.
When my girl and I go out and join the park parade, arm in arm we stroll along, a happy man and maid.